thanking everyone for coming today, and also for your patience in terms of this project and us getting together, I think now today, to at least dive into the many issues around the project. Now, today is the beginning of a new approach with respect to the ART project that is reflective, I hope, of the campaign that I ran and also the kind of administration that we want to run. And that approach is based on being transparent about what is going on. That approach is also reflective of the two-way nature of that transparency. Today we are going to share with you a whole lot of answers, but they beg a lot of other questions, and we do not have answers to every question. And it's going to take some time for us to get those answers, and we will, and we're working on it. But I want everyone to realize that when we go through the challenges that we're facing, this is going to be an endeavor that our city is going to have to deal with and fix probably for at least the next year. So we're in this for the long run, whether we like it or not. Now, going forward, we're going to do occasional deep dive press conferences on ART. This is the first of that kind. And we're probably going to have another one. When we have enough information that it's sort of worth having one, because we have new answers. And so they might be every month, every 6 weeks, something to that effect. But this issue is complex, and to be transparent, it's going to take some additional time. And so we'll be doing regular briefings on ART whenever we have new information to share. So when I decided to become mayor, I met with people all over this community. And they all voiced their concerns in many ways that Albuquerque is going in the wrong direction. While public safety was definitely the biggest concern for folks, there's no doubt that I heard my fair share about art and its impact in the community. But when I took this office, it was important for me and my team to review thoroughly the projects that we inherited, from IDO to DOJ to our unfortunate $40 million budget deficit and now ART. Now, public safety is our number one priority, but this project is so big, it impacts so much of our city and so much of our lives. This is also a high priority. Unfortunately, like the budget, what we have found is very troubling. The problems are much worse than I think anyone believed. So I said for the last 9 months that there may be some serious design issues, some implementation challenges for this project. And unfortunately, we're finding that that is true to a larger extent than the public was made aware. In short, now that we've reviewed these problems, this project is a bit of a lemon. And I want to go through exactly how this started and what the issues are now. So the first misstep that I think we're aware of as a community was a lack of input and so forth on the front end for the ART project. Now, we can't change that. It is what it is, but I want to acknowledge that that is probably the root cause of some of these issues. But today, the bus has left the station, in effect, and now art construction has already hammered its way through Central, and it's our responsibility to tell you where this project stands. The good news is that much of the pain in terms of the cones and the construction and the access to businesses is actually, for the most part, over, and that is a good thing. And so I hope people come back down to Central, they visit the local businesses, and they realize that by and large, for the most part, our main mother road, Route 66 corridor, is open for business. And so that's a good thing, and I want to make sure and highlight that. Now, no matter how we feel about this project or how much money has been spent on platforms and buses ordered and debts incurred and so forth, it is important that we understand that we have a ways to go. And so I'm going to identify a couple of categories of challenges that we have faced in terms of the different aspects of this project. So many of you have seen the lanes in the middle of Central that are marked bus lane or ART symbol across them. We know these as the dedicated lanes. And the design of the dedicated lanes has led to some traffic flow challenges. And so we're going to talk about some of those, but we have some issues with respect to the traffic engineering that need to be worked out. This includes the timing of the lights that enable the buses to cross intersections and how we make turns and U-turns along the route. In addition, there are challenges with the design of the platforms. This is causing mirrors of the buses to run up against the canopies of the station. The buses also do not line up evenly with the stations. That is both a horizontal unevenness, so there's a bump essentially, and there's also a gap that is creating issues with respect to ADA and usability. But I also want to emphasize that that is the nature of the ADA concerns. Beyond that, we don't think there are many. But as you'll see, the reason why those challenges exist are related to design issues with the buses and the platforms. And so just because they are not large issues does not mean that they're easy to fix. So my administration is committed to looking at this problem. This obviously, even though it's an issue of gap space between the platform and the bus, is a major issue with respect to fairness for people who are disabled and need to use public transport safely. Now, the biggest issue with respect to design actually has to do with the approaches to a couple of stations. And so some of the stations are situated as such that the bus has to make sort of an S maneuver to get into the stop that requires cutting across current lanes of traffic that is basically just not workable. So we are going to have to re-traffic engineer at least 2 stations, maybe others. And this again is to maintain not only usability of the line so that the driver can actually drive it appropriately, but also, of course, public safety. And in addition, there are lots and lots of minor issues that are affecting some of the stations and some of the routes. But especially at this point, I want to focus on some of the more major issues. And that leaves me to the second category of challenges we're facing. These are with the buses themselves. So firstly, we ordered 18 buses, and they were supposed to be here by October, and Lawrence is going to go over some of these dates and deadlines. We have only received 9, and there are maintenance issues with several of those buses. We've been in communication with the bus company under contract, and we are seeking a resolution to these issues. We will not sign any final release of any contractor until all obligations have been met, and especially with the buses, they are completed and functional for our city. Now, the buses, we're meeting with the bus company in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about sort of the different series of meetings that we're having, but these buses also have different charging issues, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Now, I do also want to talk about funding. Of course, I want to stand up here and say the check is in the mail. It's not. And we need to be honest with folks. We need the appropriation bill to pass at the federal level, and then we need to work with FTA to actually get the check cut. We have 2 meetings this month, both regionally and nationally in DC, to work with them on those issues, but now we are also correlated to what happens in Congress. So the other thing I want to mention about the buses, I touched on the recharging issue, but the buses right now, the system is not operational. And this has to do with challenges with respect to the calibration and charging of the chargers and the batteries and the buses. And until the safety standards are met and until we are sure that the buses can actually do what they're going to do, we do not have a predictable timeline in terms of when ART is going to be operational. And that's just a reality of the challenges. So lastly, we understand that people in Albuquerque are wondering, when is ART going to be up and running? When is it going to be fully functional? And that is a very fair question, and I have the same question. Now, I know this, that the previous administration told the public it would be done by the end of their term. And in reality, it would be unrealistic to give a firm completion date. There have been too many issues that we found, too many issues to tackle, and too many players and contractors involved at this point to be able to give a definitive date. And at the end of the day, there have already been too many broken promises with this project, and we're not going to make any more. So until these issues are resolved and our community can use ART safely and the project can be operational, and this hopefully at some point can be an asset for our city, we are going to have to continue working on these problems. So now that I've shared with you the challenges on this project, this may not have been the project that individuals wanted, that citizens wanted. Or it might have been something that you really wanted, or you might have been on the fence. But either way, regardless of which end of the spectrum you're on, whether you're on city council or whether you're in the new administration or the old administration, or just don't care, our city has to come together and make this project work. And so my administration is working to turn this lemon into lemonade. Before we are able to roll out this project, it needs to be functional and safe at every turn. And to go over some of the additional details, I'm going to ask our COO, Lawrence Rael, to give us an update on some of the other aspects of the project and their status. Lawrence?
Thank you, Mayor, and I too want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to go through the different categories, if you will, to give a little more detail on the project and the challenges that we face, and hopefully put a little bit more meat on the bones that the Mayor just provided. First, let me begin by indicating to all of you that the construction budget for the project is $135 million for the entire project. That includes stations, it includes the purchase of the equipment, the buses in this case, and all the additional roadway improvements that were done along Central from one end of the corridor to the other. Much of that money was obviously has been spent. We do have some contingency funds still available in the project, and as the Mayor pointed out, the contractors that were involved with this project, from the bus company to the contractors that have done the work, their contracts are still fully in force, and we will not close any contracts until we address all the concerns that are that we have at this point uncovered in this process. Let me just now talk a little bit about the bus issue itself. So the contract that was signed by the City of Albuquerque required that BYD, which is Build Your Dreams, is the name of the company, of the bus provider or the manufacturer of the buses. The contract required that all 18 buses that the city purchased would be delivered by October the 4th of 2017. In the contract itself, the company offered 2 additional buses to be utilized for the project for a year in order to make sure that the project began operations, etc. To date, only 9 buses have been delivered to the City of Albuquerque. Out of the 9 buses, we have had our staff, particularly the transit maintenance and operations folks, review the buses and begin to get an understanding of how the buses are constructed, because at the end of the day, our folks will be maintaining these buses. Through the process of going through the evaluation of the buses, almost every single bus has a list of about 20 to 25, in some cases up to 30 individual items that range from minor things to very significant structural things. An example is usually on buses, when the operator gets on a bus, usually the seat belts on normal buses are yellow. And it's simply because it's a cautionary thing to make sure that the driver fastens the seat belt. In these buses, all the seat belts are black. Now that's a minor issue, but it is a safety issue as it relates to operations, and it's actually a requirement by the Federal Transit Administration to ensure that these buses meet all the requirements and all the standards. 2 major issues, such as the charging system itself, the actual charger that are in the buses. When the first or second bus arrived, our staff went out to charge the bus, and they actually the actual charging system that charges the batteries shorted out and burnt out the system. Now, BYD has come back and replaced that portion of the bus, but that gives you an example of the extremes of just the minor things. Other things, for example, are the restraining belts that keep wheelchairs fastened and locked in a position in the bus. There is no consistency in where those seat belts are located. In many of the buses, they're located in one end of the bus. In other buses, they're in a different spot. So again, there's no consistency in how the buses are being basically manufactured and delivered. So as our staff goes through all those issues, we have compiled a list that we'll obviously present to the bus manufacturer to get a resolution to those issues. The most critical part, however, and one that the Mayor touched on again, is this issue of the actual charging system. Under the Federal Transit Administration requirements, first and foremost, we have to certify that the systems work. The company has a proprietary charging system that, believe it or not, many of the components of the system are made in China. So we have to have, the company was required to bring in a third-party evaluator to evaluate the actual charging system. This evaluator was in town, or inspector I would say, at the end of December, reviewed the already built system that's at the West Side Transit Facility, and would not certify the system as meeting requirements with U.S. codes for such operations. Minor things like placards on the system to the actual display on the system that when our staff goes to charge the buses, the display actually comes up in Chinese. So there are issues that need to be resolved, and they may be considered oversights by others. They are very safety related issues that need to be resolved, and as a result, the third-party certification officer did not certify the equipment. More importantly is that he actually indicated to us that we ought not be charging the buses with anything other than the proprietary system, because it's important to ensure that there's not any warranty issues associated with the equipment on both sides. So as it sits today, the ARC buses that we have on hand are still sitting in the parking lot at the West Side facility waiting for the BYD to come in and get the charging systems up and going so that we can then begin to charge the buses again and begin to do the training necessary for our drivers to learn to drive the corridor. So the bus issue, as we see it, is probably the long pole in the tent, if you will, in terms of timing. We don't expect to see these buses for some time to come. The latest word that we hear is that we now have bus number 9, bus number 11 and 10 and 11 are somewhere in the process. 13 and 14 are behind, and let me just put it bluntly, bus number 20 is still in the box. In other words, it hasn't been even put on the assembly line to put the parts together, if you will. Given that, we are certainly way behind the curve in terms of when we are even begin to operate in the corridor. Another issue with the buses that is worth informing you about is that when the RFP was issued by the city, we were informed through the contractor's response that the range of the buses would be somewhere between, remember these are electric buses, that we would get somewhere between 265 to 275 mile range on a daily charge, if you will. Well, the experience we've had early on when we did have a couple of the buses that were operational was that the range was only about 200 miles. This is a really important issue for us to consider, because simply managing the system, it's a rapid ride system. So in order to meet the time frames that we need to have the headways that we want on the system, that means that if the buses can't go beyond 200 miles, we've got to put more buses in circulation, right, so that we can make the times. And as a result of that, we don't have enough buses in the corral, if you will, that in case if one breaks, to bring more buses in. So again, another issue with the contractor, another issue that we need to work through in the process. But again, that's the status of the buses. And maybe the last most important one is that the Federal Transit Administration, in order to certify and help pay for the cost of the buses, requires that the buses be tested in a test that's called the Altoona test, and it's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and it requires a bus manufacturer to take their bus and do what's called a durability test to ensure that it meets all the standards for not only for safety but for durability, etc. BYD has taken a bus to Altoona, Pennsylvania that did not pass the Altoona test, and quite frankly apparently has been sent back to California to have modifications to the bus so it is not a certified bus. So at this point, even the buses that we have here are not certified through the FTA process. Now keep in mind, not every bus goes through the process, but the design and the standards for the bus that we purchased must be certified so that all the other buses meet the requirements of the FTA regulations. That is an important issue for us to consider, obviously, from a safety perspective. The last piece I will go through is the construction. As the mayor indicated, there are challenges in the construction aspect of this project because every station has a very unique configuration. Central is a very unique roadway, as the mother road, as the mayor referred to it. There are areas where you have pinch points where you couldn't have 2 dedicated lanes, etc. But the real critical issue here is the configuration of the actual platforms. The one at Washington and Central, for example, is situated so close to the intersection that a 60-foot bus cannot make the maneuver off of the dedicated lane to get into that platform without going into 2 lanes of traffic. That is not acceptable as it relates to the operations of the bus. So we need to have a redesign of that intersection and a redesign of how the bus will get into that platform. It doesn't mean the platform goes away. It just means that we have to do some redesigning of that intersection in totality so that we can ensure that there's safety for both the motorists traveling their private cars and for the buses to get in and out of that station. The station at Atrisco is another issue. The actual platform where the bus actually parks is not level with the station. So when the bus parks up to the platform, the bus is actually at an angle. It's at a 3 or 4 degree angle from the platform. So you can imagine what it would be like for someone in a wheelchair to load into the bus and not realize the bus is at an angle, and what would happen once they got into the bus. Or more importantly, even the challenge of getting out on the bus because of the way the bus is situated. So we have some construction issues, some redesign of some of the intersections. The lights, the timing of the lights need to be reviewed, especially the light at Coors and Central, because that intersection is so big that when the bus gets a preemption to go through the intersection, the bus has to really get going quickly and to get through the entire intersection before the lights change. Those are minor issues, but they're issues that need to be reviewed, and those are our timing issues throughout the system as we move through the process. Last but not least, as the mayor said earlier, mirrors of the buses are hit the platform, hit the columns that support the canopies. Those obviously we need to make some adjustments to those. The most important and critical one, again, has to do with the ADA accessibility issues. To give you a perspective, when that bus comes into these platforms, it's a 60-foot bus. The platform is situated in such a way so that, as the mayor said, the bus driver has to do a little bit of an S maneuver to get in and to load the bus, if you will, so it hits the platform at an angle that will get all the doors next to the platform. Well, unfortunately, again, a bus issue, but also a design issue, is that the wheels on the accordion portion of the bus are offset. So when it comes into the platform, the wheels hit the platform edge, which is appropriate because that's the way it's designed. But what happens is the bus driver then moves the front of the bus in, and then the gap from the platform onto the bus meets ADA. But inevitably, the back of the bus is out at an angle. So that means that part of the system of the platform does not meet ADA for level boarding. And the ADA issues are really important here because the Federal Transit Administration, along with the Federal Highway Administration, have standards in terms of accessibility to public transportation. And you cannot be more than 3 inches away from the platform to be able to, or to have a safe loading and unloading of folks in wheelchairs or folks that have disabilities. So those are issues that we have to work through. They're design issues of the platforms. Again, there's a lot of platforms. We have not even been to all of them yet because not all the platforms are open. We have not seen the platforms east of Louisiana and Central because they were still in some degree of construction. So we've got to look at some of those platforms, and those are going to be minor, but the platforms west of Louisiana all the way to Coors all have individual issues that need to be addressed. To include, we still haven't begun the testing on the actual ticket purchasing on the platforms. They're still in the process of putting in the connections to the actual system where you actually buy your tickets and your bus fares, etc. And then obviously signage is also an important piece of the process. When people get off the bus, you have to go to these lights where you push the button to cross the roadway. We need to put some signage to make sure we don't have people just crossing the roadway everywhere. So at the end of the day, we've got at least 6 to 8 weeks of construction issues still to work on, to include some of the ones we just described. So as the mayor pointed out, challenges with the buses, challenges with the construction piece, all add up to a lot longer if you will, construction issues that we've got to resolve before this project can move forward. Thank you, Mayor.
I need one sheet in there. Okay. Thank you, Lawrence, for providing that update. And as I mentioned, we'll provide another update in a large way as soon as we have significant new information. We're hoping that should be in February. And at that point, we also hope to start to begin to be able to have a discussion about solutions. We had a choice. I had a choice early on. Obviously, any manager would like to come out and say, here are the problems and here are the solutions, and no one has to worry about anything, and everything's going to be great. That process is going to take months, and so I think it was just appropriate that we tell people what's going on, that we call it like it is, and that we also straightforward let folks know we will find solutions and we'll work on this, but it is going to take some time. So let me close, I think, by mentioning a couple of things. Number one, we do have some new team members in place, and so I want to mention that going forward, our PIO for this project is Rick. Rick's in the back. I think give us a wave if you don't know Rick. So he'll be the first point of contact, of course, for the media. Also, Annette, who is she is our acting director of transit. She unfortunately has actually had a long scheduled vacation this week, so she's not here today, but she's going to be in charge of this project. And of course, we're fortunate to have Lawrence at the sort of top of the organization working on this. So I also want to mention that all contractors with the project are on standby, and we will not relieve them of their responsibility to the city until the entire project is completed together with this new administration and with this city. I also want to touch on specifically with the bus company. Fortunately, the contract was set up in such a way that we really don't owe any money unless all of these specifications are met. And so that is some good news. But again, that doesn't solve any of the timing issues with respect to the buses. And so with that, we are here to take your questions.
Mayor,
Yes, Dennis.
just a couple quick questions. One, how much have we spent on this project so far? How much and where has the extra money come from? Secondly, with all of these changes that are going to have to be made, how much is that going to cost, and who's going to eat that?
So they're great and fair questions. I want to highlight, just in general, we really want to do one at a time. We'll give you two this time. I get it, but then everyone's going to do so. So the first answer to your question, how much has been spent? I think Lawrence has that number.
135 million.
135 million. And spent means essentially like encumbered, right? Because like I said, we're not going to pay out and close all these contracts until we're totally done. The answer, if there is additional money that's needed, we're going to have to come up with that just like we would for any other project. And in terms of the estimates of how much that's going to cost, we will certainly provide numbers as soon as we have them, but we're not there yet. And I do want to mention this, I believe on that. The way a lot of the contracts are set up, the onus of risk and paying for that risk in these changes is on the contractor. And so we're just hopeful. We'll have to go through and see exactly which item covers under that, but a lot of these risks are actually on the contractors. Other questions? Yes, Martini.
Can you talk about the River of Lights, how the city was able to operate those buses, and how the city was able to operate those buses in terms of the charging?
Mm-hmm. Sure. The River of Lights decision obviously predates our administration. I think we came in for maybe the last week of that or something to that effect. So we don't have details in terms of what all the iterations were that they went through. But we do know that they were essentially charging the buses with a sort of homemade system. And so it certainly charged up the buses so they could run. But that does create all sorts of problems with respect to how that might affect the batteries and so forth. That's why we are not doing that going forward. Others? Yes.
Were you, first of all, surprised by some of these findings? And one of the big questions is why were all of these problems only surfacing now? Do you think that some of these could have been or should have been resolved before the administration, Berry administration was finished? Do you feel like this was all prematurely launched and there was a lot of hype over it and so forth?
So certainly, I was concerned going back a long time, but I was absolutely surprised by the severity of these issues. It was premature to run the bus. I think I answered both your questions.
You mentioned 2 stations that needed to be traffically sort of re-engineered. Trisco was one of them I caught. What was the other station?
Washington. Yeah, and we have not evaluated in terms of that final evaluation all of them. Let's say roughly half of them we did look at and did not have those issues, but 2 of them certainly stand out as needing a lot more further traffic engineering work. Yeah.
And until the other ones are complete, will we not know if there are any engineering issues with those, the ones that are still under construction further east towards the mountain?
You know, I think we certainly are committed to shortening the lead time. You know, I mean, there is sort of a process in terms of information that we get, that the on-the-ground engineers get. And so, you know, I think as soon as those are ready to be quality assured and tested, we'll get the information and we'll let folks know. But that process is really going to be a station-by-station process. So we got a long ways to go. Yeah.
So the price tag has previously been reported as 119 million, and now it's 135. When did we get this 135 number? Where did it come from? And do these problems have a factor into that larger number?
So the 119 is the construction phase of the actual stations and the bus purchases, but the total amount of money spent in the corridor is 135. And the 135 includes the federal dollars that were available to the city to fix intersections like this intersection at Lomas and Central that was reconfigured. And so one of the silver linings, if you will, in the project was that they were able to go in and use additional dollars to fix intersections that needed some work. And so that's one example of one of the intersections that was reconfigured just simply because it had challenges anyway. And so, the totality of the money spent to this point in the whole corridor is 135 million.
Okay. Yes.
Could you explain the process of the federal funding that is still kind of, I guess, on the line? And if it doesn't come through because of all these problems that are pending, who will have to pay all those billions that are still needed to finish the project?
So the going forward, we're meeting with the FTA regionally this month as well as in DC. And so we're going to get some clarity exactly on how this is working. To your question in terms of what we've done is essentially footed the money up front and we're waiting to get reimbursed. And so that's what the FTA funding is for. And with respect to timeline, the challenge is that not only are we working through meeting all the FTA requirements, which were related to the issues that Lawrence spoke of, the uncertainty at the federal level is adding increased risk to those dollars. And, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, we've paid for this in many ways, at least the bills that we have paid in advance. And so this is about a reimbursement question.
So it's still uncertain that we don't have that money yet. That's still up in the air.
Absolutely not. I mean, I think this is another thing where it was premature to say that we ever had that money in the first place. Yeah.
Mayor, where have we had $57 million on hand in previous federal grants and city revenue bond money and some other city money? Where has that money beyond the $57 million come from to pay for it?
Primarily from previous year vacancy savings. And so this was, you know, again, it's something financially that there is nothing inherently wrong with. It's a financial strategy, but the idea is basically you don't fill all the vacancies, then you move that money into a special projects fund, and then you can use that money for other projects. And that's been a hallmark of the past administration. Yep.
So based on the review that you guys have done, you guys did a deep dive into this thing, looking at every aspect of this project. What did how many of these problems was this previous administration aware of, to your knowledge? The buses, the intersections we're talking about, all of these issues.
Well, I think if anything, because of trying to stick to the facts and also just out of professionalism, I do not want to speak for the previous administration. You would really have to check with them. And there's obviously some individuals who are involved in the project who are still here and so forth. But if you strip out kind of the holidays and Christmas and New Year's, we got all this information as fast as we could when we came in the door, and we can't really speak to what happened before that.
Considering all
Yeah,
the
then I'll go
issues
back over there.
with BYD, the company, is there any chance that you might want to walk away from them and contract a different company to provide the electrical buses?
These buses are unique in that, and this is what I think they've been telling us, these are the first, to our knowledge, for the company, 60-foot fully electric buses. And so from their perspective, this is sort of new technology. Obviously, conceptually, electric buses are not new, but that's what the company is telling us. And at some point, we obviously have to make that decision. But for right now, especially because the way the contract is written, the path of least resistance is just to get it right. Let's get it right with this company, and if it takes a little longer, we're still better off because we got it done right. But at the end of the day, all options are on the table.
What would you say tonight to people who expressed concerns even before this project began, whose livelihoods have been affected by it? What would you say to them tonight?
I would say that in many ways, I shared their concerns, and in many ways, their concerns were warranted. And our city should have listened and also been, I think, a lot more straightforward with expectations. Now, we obviously inherited this, and now our city has inherited this, whether we like it or not. So I do think that at some point, there really is no turning back financially. So we've got to make the best out of this. We have to make lemonade, and we need the city to come together to help us do that. And that even comes into it with respect to driver's education and all of the different aspects of this. We are going to have to make this work. It is a legacy that is now our challenge. Yeah.
In a similar vein, do you have a comment for the business community, specifically the businesses that shuttered because of this project and the businesses that were just holding on? Early 2018 was supposed to be kind of ushering that foot traffic from art and whatnot.
Mhm.
So what did they do in this waiting period? Is there going to be any relief efforts from the city?
I think there is some silver lining there in that, by and large, most of the construction pains and the parking issues and the traffic issues we've really worked through those. And so I think from a business perspective, with respect, other than a few stops, which we're going to have to fix up, by and large, Route 66 is open and Central is open. And those businesses are open, and the city should come support them, and they should let folks know that they're open for business and there aren't the sort of hassles associated with it. In terms of, increased bus traffic and so forth, that's going to be a ways down the road. It's just an unfortunate reality.
Mayor,
Yeah.
how confident are you, or not confident, that the feds will come through with this money, $75 million?
I believe that everything was done with the best of intentions. But I also know that one hallmark of DC right now is uncertainty. And so somewhere between those two things is how I feel about it.
What is the exact amount that you're waiting on, an exact number? Is it 75 million?
Yeah, $75 million for reimbursement. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay, Martine.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the two intersections that may have to be revamped? There's the Washington one, and then the Triskel one. Is that the second one?
Yeah, and actually, maybe I'll do a visual, and then you can jump in. So I'm looking to see if I can even use one of these. So let's, here's the stop. I know this is someone's microphone. And then here's the art bus is right here, and it's parked. And so the in between is the intersection. And so if I'm the bus driver and it's a red light, I've got to get to that stop. And remember, it's an accordion bus, so it has to make like wider turns. And there's a lane of traffic here and a lane of traffic here. So this bus has to go like this and then kind of bow out and then come back in so it can swing the back end around. And so at some of these stops, like the two we mentioned, that distance is so short, like they basically just can't do it. You can't get the back end in. Plus, we've got to get the lights figured out so that when it's a green light for the bus, it's not a green light for traffic because it has to cut in front of traffic. So that's, Lawrence, you want to add the visual?
That was as great a visual as I can say. The challenge, quite frankly, is also, there's also the issue with pedestrians and pedestrian
That's right.
crossings at that intersection, and access for the handicap community to, or the ADA community to access the platform. So it's the bus is by far the biggest challenge because that intersection is very short. So they're working on that piece of it. The Atrisco one is not so much the intersection as it is the actual platform where the bus actually lands, if you will, at the platform. The bus sits at about a 3 to 4 degree angle to the platform. So when the platform actually comes out of the bus for ADA loading and accessibility, the actual plate is about 3 inches above the platform itself. So that's that kind of thing. Yeah, use
So
the
they,
visuals.
platform, bus, they should line up, right? At that stop, the bus is like that because
you
of the
go.
crown of the road.
It's on the crown of the road. So the Coors and Central intersection is quite frankly has the opposite issues that the Washington and Central has. The Washington and Central is too short. The one at Coors is too long. So when the bus gets going to get to the intersection, the preemptive lights aren't long enough to keep the bus safe as it goes to the intersection. Now that's a timing issue. That's an
change
issue that we are obviously can work through. But I think the real issue, as the mayor pointed out, is that the speed in getting the project going, and the fact that now when you have buses and you actually are doing the training, now all the issues that we've talked about present themselves in a much more dramatic fashion, because now you actually have the buses utilizing the system, and you see the shortcomings of the system as the buses try to maneuver. And remember, this is the important part. The ART program uses the same drivers that operate our normal operations of our buses, if you will. The rapid ride that runs there will now be the drivers that will be driving these
Cross-trained.
buses. So they're all going to be cross-trained. So there's a level of skill that's different from all these drivers. And we're talking about a 60-foot bus. So this is a big piece of equipment that needs to be maneuvered. And I would say we're trying to drive it like we would drive a Ford Focus, where you can do all these little turns. And it's just not practical and feasible given the constraints.
Others? Yes.
Could you elaborate a little more on the effectiveness of the batteries and from the testing that you've seen? Will they be sufficient enough, let's say, for air conditioning on hot summer months or vice versa, cold winter months? Are the batteries going to be effective enough for efficient riding?
This actually is part of the testing that still needs to be done, and even part of this Altoona process. And we've got to make sure, I think, the specs with the bus contractor are what they are, so we are optimistic that, for example, if the battery life continues to be an issue, then we're going to negotiate for more buses so that we can solve that problem. But until we actually get all of that testing done, it would be disingenuous to actually say whether or not we know the answer to that question.
And Altoona spelled A-L-T-U-N-A?
I think it has an O and a U.
I think it's
Yeah, not like the fish, but it's in Pennsylvania.
Actually, it's
Oh, tune, like the music note. Yeah. I think that's another end, yeah.
Yeah, so we've gotten really in the weeds about some challenges you guys are overcoming with this particular project. But in terms of the federal funding, can we just boil it down to like the genre of challenges? So there's ADA accessibility, that's getting the bus approved in terms of its design. What else is keeping us from that federal money? Just in broad strokes there.
The stop functionality, so these stops that have limitations, and then overall route specifications. So the timing and frequency of the route also have to be met. And I do get a lot of questions. Well, do we need electric buses and so forth? That was part of the original pitch. So that technology also, there are requirements there that we have to look at. So I think those would be the high level categories. Mm-hmm. All right. Dennis, you want the last one?
Sure. Who's responsible for these design flaws?
contractually, the contractors. And, you know, I think in general, I remember in my my MBA classes, they said, if you ever have one piece of advice, you know, under promise and over deliver. And this is an example of the opposite. All right, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.